You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Now, while we're getting to some deeper points to everything, my current understanding where I'm at now, and this goes back to the Anunnaki and what they represent, what they really were. My understanding of how creation all began is that there is a source of all. There's something you would call God that then created what some understand as the Elohim, or maybe aliens. And then through the will of this source or God, man was created through these very highly intelligent extraterrestrial or cosmic beings. And that is basically my understanding of the creation story. I'd love to get your insights into that.
So what I see in Sumer is the advent of an extremely negative civilization. And unfortunately for me, when I trace things back, I mean, we have to pay attention directly to what the most original writings were saying. In R.A. Boulay, he translates the oldest Sumerian tablet as saying, "Verily, the reptiles descend." Now, people can question whether or not he got that right, but again, we do see the Ubaid lizard figurines in that area before Sumer was founded. It's also of extreme importance, I think, to focus on the story of Noah for what it reveals to us, because I had 3 different major independent scholars all say the exact same thing. Now, if you go to the Bible and you look at Genesis and look at the story of Noah, you will see part of this story. The part that makes it make sense has been deleted from the text. But the part of the story that you will see is that people saw Noah with no shirt on, and they were afraid. Now, what's not explained is why. Why were they afraid? And what, if you go back and you insert back in the text that was removed, it says that Noah had on his chest scales. And if you look at everything that was happening at that time, the species that was created at that time was not Cro-Magnon. It was not Homo sapiens sapiens. It was the Rephaim. This was a breed of giants that were related to the Anunnaki, who I show in turn were related to Cyanians. Now, let me explain specifically what I mean by that. When the Dogon of Mali were describing the Cyanians, who had been their teachers, they described them as being amphibious. They said that they had 2 legs, a tail like a fish, and elongated heads. Now, Oannes in the Middle Eastern region is apparently the Babylonian version of Enki. And if you look up links to Enki, and I have a link to the Mesopotamian God site in my material, you will see a being who has 2 legs and a fishtail. So this is showing ties that this group that was created, I would also stress, in the Babylonian records, where they were referencing the Anunnaki as a different name, Anadoti, but it's clearly, when you follow all the clues, it's the exact same reference that's taking place. They said they were repulsive abominations. So, and again, those are their words for the beings that were overseeing them. So when we have that, and we have people who are extremely fond of the phrase "God made man in His image," I don't know. Look at yourself in the mirror. Do you think of yourself as a repulsive abomination? I don't. So I think that this again was the creation of a different group. The Homo sapiens, our species, I believe, was created in Atlantis and not in Sumer. This is my opinion. I understand that people are going to disagree with me on it, but I do have a lot of evidence to back it up, including evidence that shows the insertion of Pleiadian DNA into humans, into Denmark, at about 2000 BC, and I actually can cross-reference multiple sources to explain exactly how that DNA got there. But I'll pause again.
So when it comes to what we are as modern Homo sapiens, what's your understanding of how we ended up to be this?
So I really do think that the story of Poseidon mating with Cleito is a very significant part of the story. So I do think that at approximately 30,000 BC, Poseidon, a Pleiadian, who, again, they look a lot, some people would look at ape hominids and look at Pleiadians, and they're pretty much the only species that can pass for us. So why do we look like we look like? Because we look like them. It's not so much that they look like us. We look like them because we were largely made in their image. And when Poseidon mated with Cleito, it created these 10 twins, again, who are named, the first two of which are Atlas and Gadir. And they were the princes of Atlantis that were described in the dialogue of Plato. This is where the Cro-Magnons, again, came from, was the continent of Atlantis. And the Cro-Magnons, who are mesocephalic, have the higher forebrain capacity, they originated in Atlantis, and they were a result of sort of the gradual dilution of Pleiadian DNA with human DNA as humans were shrinking in size over time. But the original demigods, for example, Atlas, would have been a giant because he was closer to the Pleiadian originals. But as time goes by, the Cro-Mags are shrinking in size, and this is largely where I believe we came from because all the evidence does support it. Don't forget that the paleontological evidence shows Cro-Magnon starting at about 30,000 BC. And there's no plausible explanation for Cro-Magnon suddenly appearing out of nowhere other than this description of Atlantis, because again, Cro-Magnon remains have been found in the Canaries and the Azores, which are remnants of Atlantis.
Going back to if there is a source of all, do you think that there is a creator for these beings, that there is something above all?
I do happen to believe that. I write about this extensively in my fiction. I make references to two different things. Mm-hmm. So one, I make a reference to the one. And when I say the one, I mean all of us combined together are God. But I also make reference to what I call the transcendent, which is the aspect of us that has chosen to remain independent of reincarnational cycles and is the most ultimate positive being overseeing all of this. This is just a personal belief of my own.
I like that. So let's move a little bit forward. You also, in your talking points, talked about a 3D periodic table of elements. Tell us a little bit about that.
Happy to do so. So there are so many people who talk about what they sometimes refer to as sacred geometry. So in the 20th century, there was a genius who unfortunately was rather neglected. I think very few people even are aware of his work at this point, but his name was R. Buckminster Fuller. I think the most famous reference that you would have to him would be Epcot Center, unfortunately.
I've actually done a few shows on him, so I'm very familiar.
Okay, great. So in his work, at one point, he decided to break away from mainstream thought and do some investigations into mathematics. This eventually resulted in two books, Synergetics 1 and Synergetics 2, published in 1975, 1979. Synergetics 2 was a series of strategic supplemented paragraphs that were inserted into, and unfortunately, shortly after that, he died. But I came across this work, and when I read it, I was intrigued by it. The foundation of synergetics involves a mapping coordinate system that is different from the conventional mapping coordinate systems. Most of us are using a Cartesian coordinate system. This is 3 axes at 90 degrees, the X, Y, and Z axis. Fuller proposed a 6 axes at 60 degrees coordinate axis system called the isotropic vector matrix grid. And then after proposing a lot of this, he generally seemed to have this very Platonic outlook of, this is so beautiful, it must be true, but I'll leave it to other people to figure out the connections to reality. So that left an awful lot of work for the rest of us. But the students of Buckminster Fuller started the work of connecting his geometry to the applied data of physics. And they made a number of significant steps. For example, uranium has a number of 238. Okay, so where does that number come from? If you look at a conventional model of atomic structure in a nucleus, they just have a bunch of spheres glommed together randomly, and there's no elegance in it whatsoever. It can't possibly be symmetric because all the differences inside are sloppy. So what Fuller did and what his students did was show you exactly how you get to 238. So you can use pennies from your pocket for this exercise if you want. You just take out like 7 pennies and place them on a table and then try to connect them next to each other. And you'll see that for every 1 penny, you can surround that penny only when you use 6. There's no other number that works. It's 6 and only 6. And you keep doing that, and you can do that in 3D as well.